Okay, welcome back. Here we are on week 6 of the book of Revelation. I am not sure how far I will get in this video. We're just going to see where we end up. But today I want to focus, we're going to do a bit more detailed, we call exegetical work, just looking at what's going on in 2 chapters especially. And we may get past that, but chapters 12 and 13 are really important chapters. I could say that about any chapter, but these are really important because these are sort of central or pivotal in the movement of Revelation. But I want to do a little bit of review first, and then we'll get to that. But we'll spend some detailed time with parts of those texts, whereas some of the other chapters we've done some overview. First review chapters 1 through 11, and then we'll dive into what's going on in this, and then also see what's part of this. The important part of this is to see what's the flow, what's going on in Revelation here, what's the structure of things. Okay. The screen share button. There we go. That's what I'm supposed to do. Okay. Yeah. There we go. Okay. I use the Albrecht Dürer images a lot. I love them for so many reasons. One, because I cannot do that type of work. These are wood carvings, right? Wood prints. Yeah, I believe so. But he also really captures sort of the insanity of what's happening in these verses. As you're reading through, it's like this is happening, then this and this. And so if you look at the one on the left, right, you've got chapter 12, the beast with all the heads. You've got chapter 13, you've got the beast with the 2 horns. And right, he tries to make it look like a leopard, bear, lion thing. You got one head that's wounded. You got the people worshiping. You've got God in heaven. You've got the cross and angels, right? And they've got a sickle as well, gonna do the harvest. And then on the other panel, you've got Michael and the angels fighting with the devil. And like, how do we make sense of all of this stuff? Okay, we'll come to it. This is just we talked about numbers last week, and I think I've shown this image before, but to remember, we talked about numbers, the way that numbers themselves were used in the book, but also it's important to see that the number of times things are said is important. So for example, the expression, and I saw, is it mentioned here? No. And I saw is mentioned 7 times, and they are important breaks, or rather structuring elements to this book. What's weird is in chapter 12, John doesn't say, and I saw. We have this really interesting transition where he says, and a great sign appeared. That's not normal for John. So again, your attention is drawn to this passage because he's doing something different. So 1 through 10 real quick. So we have Jesus Christ, who is mentioned and shown in a few different ways in these chapters. He's the emperor, he's the high priest, he's the Alpha and the Omega, the Lamb, the Lion of Judah, the judge. He receives worship. Again, you're going to have a very hard time not being Trinitarian when you read the book of Revelation. We get the universality of sin and of deception. We see that especially in the horseman, right? This beautiful looking like Jesus figure shows up, but it leads to sin and deception. And so those chapters, that chapter in particular, is supposed to help us reflect on, have I been deceived? Am I still being deceived? Is it in large ways or is it in minor ways? And how am I contributing? Because in this case, it's not just individual acts, but for chapter 6, this is a system in which people participate that is sinful. So how am I sharing in what we would call systemic sin? Chapter 9, 20 through 21, it talks about the ongoing idolatry and sin despite judgment. Now, Revelation 11 will be a little bit different. You'll actually see that judgment will lead to repentance in some cases. He has a restraint of sin on judgment, restraint of sin and judgment on sin, because God, not everybody is destroyed, right? People are wicked and they're doing terrible things, and these outpourings of God's judgment don't destroy everyone. But at the same time, remember, these judgments are the natural results sort of people doing what is contrary to who they are called to be, right? Are they being truly human, which is what Christ offers us? Here's true humanity. Or are we trying to be humanity in our own eyes, which turns us into beasts? So here we go, and that's precisely the point that's next. The Lamb judges sin, but he also uses the aspects of the empire to do so, right? If we looked at that gospel of Apollo, or of warfare, right? These aspects of the empire um, end up coming back on the people who are participating in them. Okay, and then that other element of when you participate in sin, right? And this happens in Second Thessalonians as well. You have a choice, right? Either you are participating in the life of God, sharing in that, and that's the choice that you make, or um, you are cooperating in the one who is against Christ, and that one, the man of lawlessness. And so this is a very real option that's going to be set up more sharply in chapters 12 and 13. That's why I want to review this. So how do you counter the sin of the empire? You do it through true worship, through faithful witness, and by following the Lamb. And so this is, again, all things that are set up in Exodus and then also in Leviticus, right? What's true worship look like? How do you witness in the midst of Babylon or Egypt or Sodom or Jerusalem? And how do you follow the Lamb? Right, the story of the Exodus is going to become even more stark in chapter 15. Okay. You're also getting in this a cycle of history in the empire, right? You'll see, especially here, Revelation is going to complete a big cycle in chapter 11, and then it's sort of going to let's start back over and take a look at that from a different direction. Because chapter 11 will end with the kingdom of God has become the kingdom of the world. I mix that one up all the time. Kingdom of the world has become the kingdom of the Lord and of his Christ and shall reign forever and ever. And we're left with like, really? And then it sort of starts the story over. And then it's foreshadowing. It's looking forward to chapters 19, 20, 21, and 22. Okay. But also, these visions are trying to show the church, how do you conquer, right? So if we look at chapters 2 and the way that he speaks to the churches, chapter 2 says, the one who conquers will grant life to eat from the tree of life, which is in the paradise of God, which again, looking forward to chapter 21 and 22. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the church. The one who conquers will not be hurt by the second death. And then again, how do you do this? Through faithful worship and so on. Okay. I was also trying to draw out the importance, the connection between what the emperor is doing, what Revelation is doing, and the place of Apollo, the Apollo mythology in Revelation. Again, John is not saying this is a true story, Apollo is real, or even just to take Apollo and say this is just about Jesus. Actually, he is doing what political cartoonists do today. And the importance of Apollo for the ancient world for the Roman world cannot be underestimated. Again, the emperors used the story of Apollo to cast themselves as an incarnation of Apollo, especially Nero and Domitian in this case, and Caligula as well, but that's earlier. But here's something else. Like I talked about this. I couldn't find this image earlier, but it's in this slide. Here's an image of Apollo, right? He's got the bow, he's got the crown, and then take a look at his hand. He's got a locust, right? You remember the locust swarm that's released by this demon? Okay, so this playing with the imagery that's associated. He's the god of plagues as well. Okay. We also had earlier in this book counting out of 144,000. Now remember, counting out people is to prepare them for warfare. And that's going to come to a head in chapter 14, end of chapter 13, beginning of 14. Okay. Lots of things really quickly. The witnesses, just again to review this because it can be confusing what's going on, right? These two witnesses show up. First, John chapter 10. In Revelation chapter 10, we have John he's showing his sort of ordination or anointing as a prophet, right? He sees an angel, he's given a scroll, and he's told to prophesy as essentially the message that he's going to have. The secret of God is the same message the prophets have been preaching all along. And then he's given things that are imitative of the prophets. And he's like, this is my commission. Here's who I am. The next chapter, chapter 11, is then what's the church's prophetic mission, right? And so what do these various pieces, these lampstands and olive trees and so on and so forth mean? Some people say, oh, Elijah and Moses are coming back. And in fact, there's an expectation in Judaism of Elijah and Moses to return. And in fact, in the Transfiguration story, right, where Jesus is on the Mount with Peter and James and John, they show up, and Jesus is just talking with them. And that's interesting for a few reasons. One, because they're in the promised land, which Moses was never allowed to enter, and there he is. He gets to be in the promised land. But also because clearly Jesus is the most important of the three. So in a way, they've already come, fulfilling that Jewish expectation. But also, this expectation of Moses and Elijah returning is fulfilled in perhaps a spiritual or a symbolic way through the church. So here we go. We've got this. If anyone would harm them, the two witnesses, the two martyrs is the word that's used there. The fire pours from their mouth and consumes their foes. They have power to shut the rain, sky, and so on and so forth. They can turn the water into blood. Again, that imagery should make you think of Moses and Elijah. Look, if we compare it with Zechariah, what do you see? I see a lampstand of gold, a bowl on top of it, 7 lamps on it, 7 lips on each of the lamps that are at the top of it. And there are 2 olive trees by it, right? So these are the things that are in the presence of God, so to speak, in the heavenly temple, but at the same time have some sort of deeply symbolic significance for what's going on in John's day. And so John is using them to say essentially this. Let's get that. Here we go. Look at our temple, right? Because that's what's mentioned here. This temple, this outer courtyard is where the Gentiles were allowed to come in. And then you've got these other pieces where people are allowed to enter in more closely. But what's happening, what's being said here is this. It's not that Moses and Elijah are coming back sort of separately on their own. It's this. The lampstands are the universal church, the church that witnesses, the church as God's witnesses in the rest of the world. The witnesses themselves are the content of the church's witness. Does that make sense? So the lampstands that were mentioned back in chapters 1, 2, and 3, that's the universal church, because 7 is the number for completeness. There are 7 churches. This is the complete church. What do they preach? What does the church preach? What does it teach? What does it witness to? Well, whatever the prophets had been said, the mystery of God all along. It preaches the coming of the Messiah. It preaches God's judgment on sin. And then we see also what comes along with the ministry of Jesus Christ. So Moses and Elijah, those figures are representatives of the law and the prophets, but in a way they're also more than that. Why 2 witnesses? I'm sorry for going so fast, just really excited. Why 2 witnesses? Because in the Old Testament, if judgment was to happen, you needed 2 witnesses, right? Remember, this happens also in the New Testament. And when you're told to, if someone's done something wrong, you go and confront them on your own. And if they won't listen, you bring 2 witnesses with you to confirm. And if they won't change, then you remove them from the community, or rather exclude them from the community. So if they're the law and the prophets, or if they're if that's a good way of describing them, the law is a good way of talking about God's revelation of truth, right? We would call this divine law. He shows the way things are supposed to be done, the way things are, because of who he is. Not just, he's like, today murder is bad, but tomorrow murder will be good. But in some way, not murdering is consistent with the nature of who God is. Okay. The prophecy, then, is the application of God's truth. That is to say, when the prophets come, they're saying, usually the prophets don't say, here's something new. I see this happening in the distant future. They say, repent. Why? Because God has already told the people, if you do something wrong, you're supposed to repent. And then they start declaring what's God's law. Take care of the poor, the widow, the orphan, the foreigner. That's what you're supposed to. They're just repeating God's law to them. You remember, this is what you were told to do. Okay? So the 2 witnesses are a summation of law and prophet, of God's truth and how to apply it. How does that work? And that's what the church is called to do. We are to be those who reveal God's truth, and we are those who apply, who live God's truth. Now look at this. At the end of almost at the end of chapter 11, you've got, it says that there's a great earthquake and 1/10 of the city fell. 7,000 people were killed. If 7,000 people are killed, and that's 1/10 of the city, that means that 63,000 live. So 9/10 of the city live, and they give glory to God. Okay, that's good. The end comes with a 7th trumpet, and we didn't talk about this last week. Let's see. We get loud voices in heaven saying, the King of the world has become the King of the Lord and of his Christ, and he shall reign forever and ever. And the 24 elders who sit on the thrones, remembered from chapters chapter 4 and 5, uh, they sit on the thrones, they before God, they fall on their faces and they worship God, saying, "Give thanks to you, Lord God Almighty," and so on and so forth. Um, that's actually important. Let me read that. Who is, who and who was, for ye have taken your great power and begun to reign. The nations raged, but your wrath came. Then time for the dead to be judged, and rewarding your servants, the prophets and the saints, and those who fear your name, both small and great, and for destroying the destroyers of the earth. Then it was opened, the temple of God in heaven, and the ark was seen. There are flashes of lightning, rumblings, peals of thunder, an earthquake, and heavy hail. Now, we hear that, and then we ask the question, has it really? Has it become the kingdom of our Lord and of his Christ? And the point here is yes, because this one is a very forward-looking the church is going to continue witnessing, and then God is going to judge all of these things. The judgment will come. And for those who have accepted the witness and for those who have rejected the witness. And then, as we'll see at the end of Revelation, the two become one. And so John is saying that's the end. And we could stop at chapter 11. But John says, also, guess what? A great sign appeared in heaven. So he's sort of starting over. So essentially, chapter 12 is going to do something interesting for us. It's going to say, why is all of chapter 11 or chapter 10 and 11 necessary? Why is this important? And so you get like a closer look at things, where this has been sort of big picture description of things up to this point. Now you're going to get a closer look at what's going on. And chapter 12 has got an interesting and sort of complex structure that we're going to talk about. So, chapter 12, the woman and the dragon and the child. And then we'll see some other things that come into play. Now, the 7 trumpets, and then we get an interlude, right? It was up to this point, 7 seals, or 6 seals, an interlude, 7th seal, or 6 trumpets, an interlude, 7th trumpet. But now we've got an interlude. And this is kind of a long, connected series of stories. But chapter 12 and 13 are the longest connected narrative of all of the book of Revelation. And for many scholars, this is the central pivotal moment structurally, what's going on, like what's happening here. And you've got 4 parts in this. Maybe I should just tell you about the characters first. You got 12 characters, or you have 4 characters, essentially, if we don't talk about God and the Lamb. So here, a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. She was pregnant and was crying out in birth pains and the agony of giving birth. And another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his head 7 diadems. Those are just crowns. His tail swept down a third of the stars of heaven and cast them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman who was about to give birth, so he might, when she bore her child, he might devour it. She gave birth to a male child who is to rule all the nations with a rod of iron. Again, who is that child? That's clearly Jesus, but it connects to language in Isaiah, the ruling with a rod of iron, but also Psalm 2, 8 and 9, this Messiah who's supposed to come from the line of David. Okay? But the child was caught up to God and to his throne, okay, the resurrection and ascension. And the woman fled into the wilderness where she has a place prepared for her by God, in which she is to be nourished for 1,260 days, right? During the time that, remember that number being a symbolic number, talking about the time when the kingdom of the Lamb, the 144,000, are in conflict with the beast and his number, 666, is during this symbolically significant number of 1,260, okay? So that's the first section, verses 1 to 6. 1 to 6 and 13 to 17 are really the continuous narrative. Verses 7 through 12 try and explain, like, what's going on? Why is this happening in verses 1 through 6, right? So you get like, okay, it's the word we use for it is epexegetical, and it's explaining the things sort of around it. So this battle is happening. Why? Oh, because there's a war in heaven. Michael and his angels fighting against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought back. Eventually, this dragon is that ancient serpent who is called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world. He's thrown down to the earth. Angels with him were thrown down. And I hear a voice in heaven, now the salvation and power and kingdom of our God has come. The authority of his Christ have come, for the accuser of our brothers has been thrown down. He accuses them day and night before God, and they have conquered him by the blood of the Lamb. Therefore rejoice, and so on and so forth. And now so that's explaining why is the dragon doing this? Well, he's thrown down. He has no power to accuse anymore. He's thrown down, so he tries to get the baby boy. Verse 13, right? Sort of picking up from there. And when the dragon saw he had been thrown down, he pursued the woman who had given birth to the child. But the woman was given the 2 wings of the eagle, a great eagle, so that she could fly away from the serpent into the wilderness. And she was nourished for a time, and times and half a time. Now, remember that language of wilderness, being nourished, right? Again, connected with Exodus imagery of the people of God being sustained by God in that place. Okay, and that's where we are. We're in the process of the Exodus still. Serpent poured forth water like a river out of the mouth to sweep the woman away, but the earth came to help the woman. Earth opened its mouth, swallowed the river, the dragon poured out of his mouth, and then the dragon got furious. He decided to make war on the rest of her offspring, on those who kept the commandments of God and hold to the testimony of Jesus. And he stood on the sand of the sea. What a good place to end. Ugh. So, a completely loaded chapter. A lot is going on. As I said, this chapter's got sort of the clearest structure in all of Revelation, because Revelation is difficult to understand structurally, but also it's the central narrative. Why is all this happening? Here we go. That woman, who is she? It draws on Old Testament imagery of Eve. We see this in chapter 3, 14 to 15, but also of the idea of Zion, that is Israel, as the people of God, but also, of course, of Mary, because a woman did give birth to a man. But at the same time, this preservation for this period of time is this idea of this is the church, or rather the people of God, from whom the descendant of David has come and continues and is sustained and also has other children that the serpent goes after, that the dragon goes after. Okay, so here we go. Child, Christ. The dragon, it says pretty straightforward. This is Satan, the devil. But it draws on all this interesting imagery, right? You get the serpent in the garden. You get this language that's very similar to Leviathan or the behemoth, who are mentioned in the Old Testament, especially in the book of Job. But ultimately, this dragon figure is Satan, also an important figure in Roman military. So again, John is perfectly placed historically to draw on a wealth of imagery from both of his worlds, so to speak. And so the Dacian Draco is part of certain Roman military outfits. The dragon, right? So there we go. This chaotic, questionable figure that isn't, is he for you or against you? But also, sorry, let me go back just a little bit. What's interesting about this passage is how John has taken what's called the Leto and Python myth, which is the story about how Apollo was born. Leto was a woman who had a relationship with Zeus, became pregnant, and was giving birth to a child. Python was told, who's a serpent, dragon sort of creature, and I'll show you an image of that in just a minute, that the son of Leto would kill him. And so he tried to kill Leto and Apollo. Now, what's happening here? John is gone into political cartoon mode. Okay, this myth itself is used by the Roman emperors to make the claims to be Apollo. And so what happens, what John ultimately does then is he says that actually that whole story you're telling, if we look at the way things are unfolding, you're the dragon, you're the chaos monster, and you've been dethroned, right? That, right, this one who's anointed to rule all the nations, right, this one is the king. So this isn't Apollo. In fact, this is Jesus Christ. And so John's not saying the story's that story, just like trying to substitute figures. He's inverting a powerful myth and saying take a look at how you, Rome, are doing things. You're the beast. You're the dragon. You're the one attacking us. In all of the way that you live, from your propaganda, from the treatment of the poor, from military conquest, all of these things are things that belong to chaos. They are things that are contrary to what it means to be truly human. Okay? And so you have John is usurping or dethroning Apollo. And so that sort of ends there with that little bit of trying to capture the child and the woman. Let me just give you I think I have an image of Apollo here. Boop. Oh, there it was. There you go, Apollo shooting Python. Remember, Jesus doesn't have the bow. He's got the sword. And the way that this dragon is defeated, we're going to see over time, right? Jesus will come back, white horse with the sword, and what that's going to look like. So by verse 13 of this passage, though, the dragon failed. Okay, it didn't accomplish what it tried to. Again, so John borrows or takes this myth apart, mocks it, and then continues with his own story, right? So this is what happens with Christ. The devil fails. What's next? Okay, so the dragon turns on. The dragon turns, and he's going to attack the people. But what else can he do? Not only can he attack the people, we see chapter 13, these different beasts that show up. So the first beast, let's look at this. Rising out of the sea with 10 horns, 7 heads, 10 diadems, blasphemous names. And the beast that I saw was like a leopard. Its feet were like a bear's. Its mouth was like a lion's mouth. And to it the dragon gave his power and his throne and great authority. One of its heads seemed to have a mortal wound, but its mortal wound was healed. And the whole earth marveled as they followed the beast, and they worshipped the dragon, for he had given his authority to the beast. And they worshipped the beast, saying, "Who is like the beast who can fight against it?" And the beast was given a mouth, uttering haughty and blasphemous words, and it was allowed to exercise authority for 42 months. Again, that period of time when the empire and the church are in conflict. It opened its mouth to utter blasphemies against God, blaspheming his name, and so on. It was allowed to make war on the saints and to conquer them. And authority was given to every tribe and people and language and nation. Or sorry, it was given over every tribe, language, people, and nation. Dwell on the earth, and earth will worship it. Everyone whose name has not been written before the foundation of the world in the book of life of the Lamb who was slain. If anyone has ears, let him hear. If anyone is taken captive, to go to captivity, or he goes to captivity. If anyone is to be slain with the sword he must be slain. Here is the call for the endurance of the faith and the faith of the saints. Okay, so you get 2 beasts. Here in verse 1, you get the imperial power, the throne, so to speak. Again, this is not to say this is the Roman Empire, but whatever it is, it manifests in history as capital E empire. It shows up in different ways, and it takes those things it claims those things rather that belong to God. And you see that this is what John is doing because of the way he uses Daniel. Right? Daniel's got 4 separate creatures. He's got leopard, bear, whatever, those things. John patches them together as one beast. Hey, look, you got this one beast. It's like a leopard. It's got a bear. It's got a lion's mouth. He makes it into one creature. And to sort of exemplify, this is just all those things as one. It's just one big beast. Eugene Peterson describes it as, he thinks it's comical. He's like, it looks like it's a patchwork animal, like that someone might make, and the stuffing is sort of coming out of it. You should look at it and say, that's a ridiculous creature. I'm not sure I would go that far, but I do think you are supposed to see the patchwork nature of this beast. Okay, it's all, whatever empire it is, it's whatever little e empire, it's the big E empire that's going to exist through all generations. It's going to be that power that keeps showing up that says, hey, you've got a responsibility to me, to honor me, to worship me. Hey, I'm going to tell you what's right and wrong. Okay, and we see this manifest in some very blatant ways. For example, in the way that China treats Christians, right? You have most recently an article that came out, or rather that leadership has told Christians on welfare state welfare, that they can no longer worship Jesus. If they want to receive welfare, they need to worship um, Jinping, the current president, and Mao Zedong, the founder of China, communist China. That's one example. Or of Christian parents being told their children will be taken away if they don't stop being Christians, and they'll send their kids to re-education camp. That's pretty blatant. Now, I'm not saying America is great. In fact, you can great in that regard. You can say actually that two wrong things can happen at the same time, and they're both wrong, and not just say that one's wrong and we're fine. So I would invite you to then think about ways in which we as Americans see the power of empire at work, and we participate in it, and the way that we are called out of it. Those are very important things for us to think about. It's always easy to say, well, look at what they're doing. They're killing people over there. I haven't killed anybody. But it does raise questions for us then. I mean, what about the products that you purchase and where they come from? And does that participate in the loss of life of individuals? For example, what about our emphasis on, well, I'm not going to tell you. I want you to think through it on your own. I've got lots of things that I think. Next beast shows up. Verse 11, I saw another beast rising out of the earth. It had two horns like a lamb, and it spoke like a dragon. People try and make some, it's got two horns. There's no two horns in Daniel. It seems to be that this is, the point here is a comparison to the lamb, but it's not quite the lamb, right? It's like a goat, really, which is similar, right? They sound the same. Like my daughter doesn't distinguish between the sounds of sheep and goat, but it has two horns like a lamb, but it speaks like a dragon. So it looks good again, right? It's sort of like this white horseman with a bow. It looks good, but it sounds like a dragon, right? You should notice if like it looks beautiful and it's like, which should sound beautiful, but it's like, rah, 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 rah. I imagine that's what a dragon sounds like. It exercises all authority of the first beast in its presence, and makes the earth and its inhabitants worship the beast whose mortal wound was healed. It performs great signs. Great signs, and let's see, making fire come down from heaven to earth in front of all people. Now, John, again, I can't demonstrate this conclusively. I think that there is a great likelihood that the imagery that's drawn on here, I showed this to you once, is some of the actual false sign inventions of a guy named Heron of, not Hierapolis. I've forgotten his name. He's a Greek inventor, though, and look at some of these inventions that he came up with. I talked about these before briefly. Computer's old, so it takes a long time to switch to the things that I want. Anyway, I'll just describe them at first. These items, or these things that he made, look like they are occurring miraculously, but in fact, he's created a system, a machine, using steam to bring about some sort of effect, some sort of, there we go. So here's one, right? You've got, I forget, you make an offering, and then ultimately here, this is another Hercules destroying the multi-headed beast, but in this case, just one-headed. So it might be the Heracles story instead. But you make an offering, and then he smashes the head of the dragon, right? Or this one, even more fascinating. Will the gods accept your sacrifice? Go to the outside, offer your sacrifice. The fire heats the water below. It causes basically like an elevator system to make the doors of the temple open miraculously, when in fact it's all a deception. And so there are examples of this that seem to fit with some of the description, or some of the way that we see in Second Thessalonians or in Revelation 13 that John is sort of hinting at. Okay, let's go back here. Boop. All right, you've got the beast coming out of the sea. I talked about the wounded head and Nero de Vivos myth. That is to say that some people believe that Nero hadn't been killed, even though, and that he was coming back. Or, and so John is sort of playing on this because Nero really did kill himself, right? He stabbed himself in the neck. So you've got a wounded head. And so here he's coming here the empire didn't die with Nero, right? Vespasian saved it. He's the beginning of the next dynasty. So the first one was the Julio-Claudian dynasty. That sort of ends with that family, with Nero, and then it's revived by Vespasian. We get the revived empire. It mentions 7 hills, and or 7 hills, 7 heads or 7 hills. Again, this is clear allusion to Rome. That's not to say that this beast is just Rome, but it's sort of the seat of imperial power. I can go to the image here, right? You've got our different hills, Palatine Hill, forgetting which one is where, anyway, doesn't matter. But here you go, the 7 hills of Rome. So he's making some clear connections. He's not hiding that he's alluding to Rome. That's not, that he's not interested in hiding that, but he is trying to make clear, but it's not just about that. It's about the empire whenever it shows up. And so we have to be asking ourselves, how has the empire shown up in our lives? We talked about Nero being referred to as a beast in other texts, the Sibylline oracles, a guy named Philostratus, and then another person named Pliny the Younger. They all refer to Nero as a beast. And then again, in 1318, this is the second beast rising out of the earth. That this is a clear connection. Or sorry, this is the sea beast again, who is the name Nero Caesar adds up to 666. Now it's important to see that in this, throughout all this, the beast conquers, right? We'll see that in throughout this, but and that beast was mentioned in chapter 11. Sorry, I'm off screen. In chapter 11, and then, oh, that's the wrong chapter. And when they finished, the beast that rises from the bottomless pit, right? So it's alluded forward to chapter 13. It comes and makes war on them. They're going to be killed, but they're going to be revived, right? But it conquers them, but they also conquer the beast, right? And then we see again in chapter 12, it exercises this authority, makes the earth and its inhabitants worship the beast whose mortal wound was healed. So this is it says sea beast, but this is a blend of the two beasts. Okay. Anyway, there we go. How much time do we have? Let's switch over. What time is it now? 2:06. I've been going for 30-something minutes, I think. All right, let's just finish chapter 14, maybe 15. Yeah. Now, look at how this chapter ends. Chapter 13, this calls for wisdom. Calculate the number. It's the number of man, 666. I looked, and behold, there's a lamb, 144,000. The names written on their foreheads, right? So you get those two numbers put right next to each other, and they're there purposefully. You're supposed to say, ooh, look, the numbers are coming together. Something's supposed to happen here. And we see, right? It looks like the warfare, right? And if we read these texts that come from the Qumran that talk about the expectations of the Jewish community for their Messiah, they are looking for someone who is going to come, a king who will come and who will murder these Romans and everyone else, all the foreigners, and get them out. They want a messianic battle, okay? We call it Armageddon. It's likely that this word is taken from Megiddo, rather. Megiddo is the name of a valley in Israel that was in a rocky hill country. It's the perfect place for battle because it's a big field, essentially. And so that's why that one is picked. That's why that one is used. And we'll see that show up later in Revelation. But here we go. Battle. What's going to happen? I heard a voice from heaven, like the roar of many thunders, like the sound of loud thunder. Many waters, like the sound of loud thunder. I heard the sound of harpists playing, and they were singing a new song. Right? That goes back to the book of Psalms, but also to Moses, who sings a new song. And so again, this Exodus imagery, they're part of the Exodus. They're singing the new song before the throne, and the living creatures and the elders. And no one could learn that song except the 144,000 who've been redeemed from the earth. And again, this is just a large, complete number. We remember when John first heard it, he hears it counted, then he turns and he sees it's too big to be counted. So, it is these whom have not defiled themselves with women, for they are virgins. Again, that language of virginity and so on is really symbolically used, tied up with the idea of of false worship and idolatry in the book of Revelation. These have been redeemed from mankind as first fruits for God and the Lamb. There was no lie. And we're going to see what unfolds here is worship instead. The militaristic images become images of sacrifice and worship, right? So all that stuff that was associated with the coming military leader of the Lion of Judah, who's a lamb who is slain, instead become images of sacrifice and of worship. Okay. And then we see in 4:6-13, I saw another angel flying directly overhead with an eternal gospel to proclaim to those who dwell on earth, every nation, tribe, and language and people. And it said, fear God and give him glory, because the hour of his judgment has come, and worship him who made heaven and earth, the sea, and the springs and water. Okay. Another angel, second, followed. Fallen is Babylon, she who has made all nations drink the wine of passion of her sexual immorality. Again, it's over, but it's going to sort of restart. He's going to cycle back again, right? It's fallen is Babylon. Okay, but then, but there's still this fight that's going to happen. Or rather, there's still the destruction by the beast. Another angel, third, says, if anyone worships the beast in its image and receives a mark on his forehead or his hand, he will drink the wine of God's wrath, poured full strength into the cup of his anger, and he'll be tormented with fire and sulfur in the presence of the holy angels, in the presence of the Lamb. The smoke of their torment goes up forever and ever. They have no rest, these worshipers of the beast in its image, right? So look, worship him, worship God, get the new song, or worship the beast, receive his image, and you'll be destroyed. Here's a call for endurance for the saints, those who keep the commandments of God and their faith in Jesus. I heard a voice from heaven saying, write this, blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from now on. Blessed indeed, says the Spirit, they may rest from their labors. The deeds follow them, for their deeds follow them. So Babylon has fallen. Okay, so we've gotten again to the end of a cycle. So chapter 11 sort of ended. The kingdom of the world has become the kingdom of the Lord and his Christ. Babylon has fallen here. Okay, judgment has come. So it keeps looking forward, and it's going to cycle back again, like I said. The harvest versus the vintage. What do I want to say about that? I don't think I'm ready to talk about it. Let's just look at what happens here, right? You're going to see, I looked and behold a white cloud, and seated on the cloud like a son of man, a golden crown on his head, sharp sickle in his hand. Another angel came out of the temple, calling with a loud voice, put your sickle and reap, for the hour has come, for the harvest of the earth is fully ripe. And so he sat on the cloud, swung his sickle across the earth, and the earth was reaped, right? So again, this idea of reaping is associated with God, the end of time, end of time, right? When God comes and judges the righteous and the unrighteous. Another angel comes out of heaven, had a sharp sickle. Another angel came out from the altar, and the angel who has the authority over the fire called with a loud voice to the one who had a sickle, put in your sickle and gather the clusters from the vine of the earth, for the grapes are ripe. So the angel swung his sickle across the earth and gathered the grape harvest of the earth and threw it into the great winepress of the wrath of God. The winepress was trodden outside the city, and the blood flowed from the winepress as high as a horse's bridle for 1,600 stadia. There's so much going on there. It is anticipating chapter 19, where we're going to see the horses in the winepress. What's that going to look like? Let's just take a look. Grab one to Ian real quick. Chapter 14. This is one where I feel just less prepared than otherwise. Gospel, judgment. So judgment's been announced. Here it's being poured out in a different way. The harvest of the Son of Man. And it's distinct from the surrounding passages, and it raises two main questions. How do the two halves, the harvest and the vintage, relate to each other? Are they two different events? Are they the same thing? Are they both negative images of judgment, or is one positive and the other one's negative? Right? Is the harvest good? The good people, they're going to be made into bread, whereas the grapes are the tromping out. The grapes of wrath, right? The story by John Steinbeck is drawn from that. How do the passages function with the narrative? Should it really belong to the following chapter? So what is going on here? We see this judgment. So when we look at the second portion of this, the first portion of this, it looks like the first portion is the response, that is to say, the harvest is responsive people to the good news. Um, the second portion is dealing with um, sometimes, right, the language of vine. The reason why the question is raised is this the good and the bad, or is this the good and the good? Is it two ways of saying the same thing? Is that the vine, right? Jesus refers to people in John's gospel as you're the vine, I'm the vine, you're the branches. And so there's this connection of people to the idea of a vineyard. But here, John is doing something a little bit different. You get the image of the harvest sort of contrasted with the vineyard. It continues this. There's a metaphor that's being used in Joel 3:13, also Isaiah 63:3. And we'll look at those tomorrow. Just remind me to see how these images are being used. This image of death in contrast to life in the New Jerusalem, right? The water of life, the book of life, river of water of life, tree of life. The juice of the grapes as they were crushed was sometimes called its blood. And this allowed wine to be a natural symbol of blood that Jesus drew on the Last Supper. Placing the winepress outside the city, as it says, right, in verse, call loud voice, sickles, outside, verse 20, it's outside of the city, gives the image of it being a judgment like we see in the judgment of Babylon in Revelation 18. It's an exaggerated imagery of the blood that flows. It's sort of a standard for apocalyptic imagery. That the people are being judged outside the city. So I would say yes, the good and the evil, the harvest of those who have responded rightly, the winepress are those who have not responded rightly. And we'll just talk about this a little bit tomorrow. I think that's a good place to leave. I want to read this still. I'm going to read this. Can I read this to you? Nobody's going to answer me. You have to listen to what I say, I suppose, or just turn it off. The two harvests of grain and grapes correspond to the basic need for food and drink in bread and wine, though John's vision report does not appear to make anything of that. Rather, the grain harvest is a positive image of the one like a son of man bringing into final safety those who are faithful to God. And the text in these verses run parallel to other New Testament images of harvest without drawing much on other Old Testament ideas. By contrast, the grape harvest, delegated to an angelic harvester, draws extensively on Old Testament images of nations who oppose God and his people. As with other episodes in Revelation where consecutive sections offer different perspectives on the same reality, John is giving us a symbolic depiction of two aspects of judgment. For those who have responded to the gospel, it is good news. For those who have not, it is bad news. I just like the way he puts things, even that's what I said already. So let's stop there. Chapter 14, that's as far as we've gotten. So it's really only 3 chapters you should have read. Oh, I didn't even tell you to. And then we'll pick up at 15 for next week. We've got, 2 more weeks of this class? Okay, I think that's it for today. I'm going to maybe stop the screen share. There we go. And then I'll see you on Thursday. Goodbye.